The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
The cold-blooded murder of Ron Stovall had all the signs of a mob hit. After a criminal with alleged ties to organized crime was arrested with the murder weapon, police thought they had their man, until a shocking courtroom confession blew open a deadly conspiracy involving a grandmother, a hairdresser, her wannabe gangster boyfriend, and a murderous custody dispute. I'm Vinnie Politan, and this week's Court TV podcast features an audio edition of our original true crime series, Accomplice to Murder, which looks at the cases and verdicts that may not be as clear-cut as initially thought. Have a listen.
This is the Court TV podcast with Vinnie Politan.
He was shot outside first. It was a pretty good mess.
It was an execution, plain and simple.
They started asking questions. Who would be interested in killing this guy, Ron Stovall?
We knew we had our murderer. He just said, okay, I did it.
When he got on the stand, he gave us information about other people involved that we did not have.
She was better. He demeaned her.
Ann Trexler did not look like a murderer.
It is a circumstantial case. They don't have a smoking gun. They don't have direct evidence.
You just don't know how it's going to come out when you put the case in front of a jury.
This is Panama City, Florida, known for its beautiful water and beaches and peaceful neighborhoods.
It was the warm weather and idyllic sunsets that drew single mother Angelica here from Montana, where she met Ron Stovall, himself a doting single father to his daughter Kirsten. Kirsten and Angelica's son Nathan quickly became close, and before long, she and Ron were married, with a daughter of their own, living in a comfortable home in this peaceful neighborhood.
Ron was an extremely hard worker. He would get up at 3 a.m. to go to his job at UPS. She was taking care of the kids. They had a little house together and just really involved in their kids' lives. And so it was sort of, the American dream, building up this family life together.
But in the early hours of October 6, 1998, that dream would come to a tragic and brutal end. Ron's mother remembers the call from Angelica.
So I picked up and I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "Ron's been shot." And I said, "Real bad?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Like dead?" She said, "Yes." So then I told my husband, I said, "Ron, you go. I'll stay and hold the phone."
Police come running out and grabbed me and said, "You can't come in here." So I said, "What about my son?" They said, "Can't tell you."
Once I got there, it was already a pretty big mess. I went inside the crime scene and took a look around, kind of an initial look. Majority of the incident that had happened before we arrived appeared to have happened in the hallway, foyer area, and the kitchen. The kitchen was a major crime scene, and the victim was still lying in the floor of the kitchen. There was a lot of blood and a lot of evidence strewn throughout the house.
Ron's wife, Angelica, was here that horrific morning as her husband was gunned down.
After Ron had been shot outside, he'd run past Angelica into the kitchen and collapsed on the floor. She tried to keep the shooter from entering, but he'd shot through the door and started to force his way inside. Once he got his pistol past the door, he shot point blank at Angelica, but somehow missed. While she fled to the bedroom to call 911, Ron struggled to stand. The shooter raised a sawed-off shotgun, and while Angelica couldn't see his face, she heard him say, "I'm going to get you. This is for her." And that's when she heard one final shot.
It was an execution, plain and simple. So it was incredibly gruesome. There was nothing impersonal about this killing. It was a very, very close and personal murder.
But who would want Ron dead so badly they would gun him down in his own home in front of his wife and children?
I think in the beginning of any murder, you walk into it and you're not sure exactly what's happened. I think you're suspicious of everyone.
He asked me, where do you think we ought to start? And I said, you need to start with his ex-wife.
Some of the first information that we received, like I said, was the custody battle in the Trexlers and Tina Stovall, which was Ron Stovall's ex-wife.
Just before he was murdered, Ron Stovall had filed a motion to hold Tina in contempt, alleging she was in a relationship that was detrimental to Kirsten, that Ron was in a better position to care for her, and asking his former wife to pay for child support.
We interviewed Tina early on, and we just found out about her family, a family situation. We asked her about the custody problems.
But Tina had an airtight alibi and was eliminated as a suspect.
A month passed and police still had no idea why anyone would want Ron Stovall dead. But then, just as the investigation began to go cold, a crime committed just down the beach from here gave investigators an important new clue.
Police get a call from a guy who had dealings with someone named Tony Perez. The caller says that he sold a firearm to Tony Perez that was used in a home invasion that was recently investigated by police.
Police found a stolen vehicle during the home invasion in front of Perez's home, obtained a search warrant, and recovered several weapons from inside.
Detectives sent the firearms they found here to a crime lab for ballistics testing. They were stunned when the results showed the guns were the same ones used to murder Ron Stovall. Police learned that Perez was from Louisiana and had a long string of drug arrests and was rumored to be a mob enforcer. This made police wonder, what had Ron Stovall gotten himself mixed up in?
Detective Dan Bates was in charge of interrogating Tony Perez.
We knew we had our murder, so we went out to the jail, and we picked him up, we brought him back down to our police department. And I was on one side of the table, he was on the other side, and he wasn't coming off much at the beginning.
Over the next 5 or 6 hours, Perez rambled on to Dan Bates that the murder was part of a vast international drug trafficking conspiracy involving various foreign nationals. And then something remarkable happened.
And he just kind of looked up at me and he said, "What do you want? What do you want me to say?" And I said, "I want you to tell me you killed that man." And he just said, "Okay, I did it."
But after admitting to the murder of Ron Stovall, Perez refused to tell police why he'd done it.
He doesn't have connections to the Trexler family, to Ron, to anyone in the Stovall family that they can tell. So this was really kind of a head-scratch moment for investigators.
But upon further investigation, one thing became clear to police. Tony Perez was no mafia hitman.
He had told several people, that he was connected to the mafia. He wasn't. He was living off of Kim Miller, living off his girlfriend, is what he was doing.
Kim Miller worked at the Hot Heads Hair Salon, which used to be located here behind me.
Miller owned the salon and had hired Perez part-time to help shampoo clients' hair and clean the place. Tony Perez was facing death by lethal injection when his trial started in October of 1998.
He knew that he did not want to end up on death row. Even if he were never executed, he didn't want to be there. And so he was motivated to help himself.
And so, when Perez was called by the defense to testify, he dropped a bombshell.
Antonio Perez took the stand, and he, in an effort to save his life, said, among other things, and this is a paraphrase, "Hey, don't kill me. There are other people out there that are guilty as well." He implicated his girlfriend, Kim Miller, as being the go-between, and he implicated Ann Trexler as the person who paid for the killing.
Ann Trexler, a church-going grandmother who also just happened to be the former mother-in-law of the murdered Ron Stovall.
The relationship between Ann Trexler and Ron Stovall, by all accounts, was not a good one. Ron had even talked of taking his daughter and moving to Montana with his new wife and new child. That apparently caused quite a tear in any kind of relationship that existed between Ron Stovall and Ann Trexler.
Suddenly, the case is blown wide open. The puzzle pieces fall into place. It's really an astonishing moment, and the investigators had the front row seat to that in that courtroom.
As soon as that trial was over, we got together with the police and said, we can go now. Let's put all this together. Let's see if we can build a case. She was arrested at her home and taken to jail.
When we return, Ann Trexler goes on trial for the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
He was just sitting there looking at me, laying there like a little baby.
Ann Trexler went on trial here in May of 2001 for the murder of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall.
If found guilty, Ann Trexler could be put to death, but she didn't exactly fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer.
Looks are very deceiving in this case. Ann Trexler did not look like a murderer. Ann Trexler, during the trial, had her hair done every day. She was always dressed very nicely.
Leading the charge for the prosecution in this case is Joe Grammer. He's been with the prosecutor's office for 20 years. He sticks with the facts. He doesn't go for the drama.
In October 6, 1998, when Ron Stovall was gunned down at his home on Gale Court, immediately the question arose, why?
You feel confident in the evidence that you have to present. And you feel confident that the jury will look past the appearance.
Now, I expect the evidence in this case will show that the answer to that question is that the murder of Ron Stovall was bought and paid for by the defendant in this case, Priscilla Ann Trexler.
Prosecutors know they have a circumstantial case. That's it. But that doesn't mean it's a weak case.
Grammer makes that perfectly clear as he calls his first witness to the stand.
I know my first witness is going to be Angelica Stovall, who has just a horrific story to tell and cannot tell it without great emotion.
The early morning hours of October the 6th of 1998, did Ron wake you up?
Yes,
You recall about what time that was?
about 3 a.m.
For what purpose were you awakened?
He couldn't find his lunchbox.
I knew once Angelica took the stand, the jury was going to look at this as if a bomb had gone off.
He was right at the end of the walkway, right where the garage had ended. And we heard this large bang, and he jumped up. And he came down and he landed on one knee. And he goes, "What the hell was that?"
Then what?
Then he got up and he turned around and his eyes were like this big. And he started running toward me.
She was able to describe the terror of seeing a man coming up the path to come in the house.
This man come around the corner with a gun and he started shooting it at me. I slammed the door shut.
So you shut the door. What was Ron doing?
He was laying on the ground. He was just sitting there looking at me, laying there like a little baby.
Did you see the man again with the gun?
Yeah, he started pushing on the door and I was on my knees trying to hold the door closed.
You're trying to hold the door closed.
Yes.
Did that have any effect on the man trying to get in the door?
Yeah, he turned the gun and pointed right at me and shot it.
Did the bullet hit you?
I thought it did. I thought I was dead. Because I looked right down the bullet, right down the barrel.
Everyone was at the edge of our seats listening to her story. The fear and terror and grief was so real.
Were you able to get away from that position?
Yeah, I got up and ran to my baby's room.
Let me ask you, where was Ron Stovall at that point? When
He was in the kitchen.
She heard what Antonio Perez said right before he fired that shotgun blast that left all doubt as to whether Ron was going to live or die.
Could you tell what was going on in the other room?
Yeah, well, when I was running back, I heard him say, "I'm gonna get you, this is for her."
Did you hear any other shots?
Yes.
Angelica Stovall was the only one who was able to communicate the terror of what she went through and the horrific and awful things that Ron went through.
The what was pretty clear. Ron Stovall had been killed. He'd been shot several times. So the police know what, and they wanted to know why.
But the why wouldn't be as easy to prove, since the only thing linking Ann Trexler to the murder of Ron Stovall was the testimony of two questionable witnesses and limited circumstantial evidence.
Through Angelica as a witness, prosecutors were trying to establish the defendant as aggressive and just downright mean when it came to the custody arrangements. She decided with her husband to move from Virginia down to Panama City, Florida, to be close to her daughter and granddaughter and sort of manage that custody arrangement.
She became dramatically involved. We no longer saw Tina anymore. Tina pretty much wasn't even in the picture.
There were ugly words between Ann Trexler and Ron's new wife.
It started off just by calling me a lot of bad names. She used to call me the B word a lot. She used to call me the C word a lot.
The atmosphere became so toxic that prior to the murder, Ron's mother warned him to be careful.
It wasn't 3 weeks before he was killed. He was over here, and he'd told us that he's going back to court. And she said, "Son," said, "people get shot over this."
She had moved here from Virginia to be near her grandchild and her daughter, and she was now faced with the possibility, at least the thought, that this child may be moving off to Montana.
The prosecution next called to the stand Debbie Denise Luco, a friend of Ron's ex-wife, Tina Trexler.
Do you know Ann Trexler?
Yes, I do.
How well did you get to know her during this time?
Very well. She didn't have many friends here in Panama City.
From those conversations, did you get a feeling for how Ann Trexler felt about Ron Stovall?
Well, that, there was always statements that he'd fall off the face of the earth, or, that he wasn't in their lives, that without him there, their lives would be a lot easier.
Florida to Montana is a long, long way. I believe that Ann Trexler had the chance meeting with someone who would take her up on her spoken desire that her ex-son-in-law be killed. Kim Miller, who had a boyfriend who was willing to listen and say, "I'm a tough guy, I can do it."
Angelica Stovall had stunned the jury with an eyewitness account of her husband's murder, but the prosecution still had to prove that it was Ann Trexler who had ordered Ron's execution. And to do that, they needed Kim Miller.
She wasn't just the connection between Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler. She was the connection for the phone calls, for the money delivery.
And so the prosecution made a tough call.
They did what they had to do. They made a deal for Kim Miller to plead guilty to a third-degree felony, no jail time. Now, that's for a woman who introduced the hitman to Ann Trexler, who set this entire line of events in motion, leading to Ron Stovall's death.
Yeah, Kim Miller got a good deal. There's no hiding that. But without Kim Miller, we did not have Ann Trexler. Without the person who introduced the two people, we did not have the person who paid for it. Who was the reason that Ron Stovall was dead was because of what Ann Trexler wanted.
Kim Miller was one of those witnesses that, everyone is at the edge of their seat for, right? She is the key to this case.
Can you tell the jury your name, please?
Kim Miller.
How do you make your living?
I'm a hairstylist.
What we wanted to get from Kim Miller was how the connection was made between Antonio Perez and Ann Trexler, and what Ann Trexler had said to her that was relevant to wanting to have her son-in-law killed.
Did there come a time where Ann Trexler said anything to you about wanting Ron Stovall out of the picture?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that was said?
She basically wished that something would happen to the son of a bitch, that it'd be better if he wasn't around.
Shortly after that, Miller said she saw Trexler speaking with Perez while he was washing her hair. She could only make out a few words like Ron Stovall, arrangements, and to be killed.
Did you have further conversation with Ann Trexler about Tony Perez and Ron Stovall?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what the content of the next conversation was?
The next conversation was discussing a price on having Ron Stovall killed.
Miller said that Perez first asked Trexler, "What if I just hurt him, maim him so bad that he wouldn't be able to take care of Kirsten?"
She didn't like the idea. She wanted him dead.
How do you know that?
She said so.
What did she say?
She said that she didn't like the idea, that she didn't want him maimed. She wanted him dead.
Miller heard Perez say, "Okay, I'll do it, but it'll cost you $50,000. Trexler said she didn't have that kind of money and made a counteroffer. How about $10,000? $5,000 in advance and another $5,000 when Ron's dead. Perez told her, "I'll think about it." Later, he told Kim Miller he'd do it.
And what did you do with that information?
I told Ann Trexler.
Where did you tell her?
In the salon.
So when she came back 2 weeks later, was it time to get her hair done again?
No.
When she came back 2 weeks later, what happened?
She gave me $5,000.
How did she give you $5,000?
In an envelope.
Where did you see her next?
In the salon.
And what was the purpose of that visit? Were you doing her hair that day?
No, she brought in the remaining $5,000.
And how was that $5,000 delivered?
The same as the first one, with cash in an envelope that looked like a drive-through teller window bank.
And was there anything said by the defendant to you in regard to that $5,000?
She hugged me and told me that she had not a friend like me.
She had what?
She hadn't ever had a friend like me.
She had never had a friend like you?
Mm-hmm.
Kim Miller's testimony was essential, it was truthful, and it was credible.
But the prosecution wasn't relying solely on the word of Kim Miller to prove Ann Trexler had ordered a hit on her former son-in-law.
And can you tell the jury what the customer's name is?
Priscilla A. Trexler and Jack Trexler.
Is there a record in that statement of a cash advance on that account on September the 23rd of 1998?
Yes, there shows a cash advance for $2,800.
The $10,000 that Ann and Jack Trexler took out of their respective accounts is also pretty compelling.
This is a check that was cashed, and it shows a cash out that the teller produced that included that cash.
Okay. How much? Go ahead.
$7,411.99.
Ann and Jack Trexler withdrew a combined total of almost exactly $10,000 in cold hard cash, the price that Perez was asking for to kill Ron, and they withdrew it right before Ron was murdered.
All of those were insignificant unless connected with the whole. And so it was very important for us to present that evidence to the jury.
The prosecution had attempted to show that Ann Trexler was the mastermind behind the death of her former son-in-law, Ron Stovall. Now it was the defense's turn, and Trexler's lawyer tried to flip the script and point the finger at the prosecution's star witness, Ann's hairdresser, Kim Miller.
Ann Trexler's lead defense attorney is Russ Ramey.
This courthouse was established decades and decades ago for the sole purpose of serving justice.
Russ tends to go for the theatrical. You know, he likes to be very expressive in front of the jury.
Evidence is going to show very clearly that Kim Miller has lied. She's lied again. She's lied again. She's lied again.
Sometimes that results in a little bit of theatrics.
And again, and again and again and again.
When accomplice testimony is used to go to trial against another alleged accomplice, Florida law says that you should very closely scrutinize their testimony because they have a lot of reasons to be saying what they're saying that might be inconsistent with the truth.
Good morning, Ms. Miller.
Good morning.
I'm Jim White. Along with Russ Ramey, we represent Ms. Trexler. After you're sentenced here, you had an agreement that no other charges could be filed against you arising from this incident.
Correct.
So, you're no longer touchable for murder. The worst you can get is 5 years for violation of probation. That's the way you understand the deal, isn't it?
Yes.
That's the deal you wanted, wasn't it?
I don't know who wouldn't have wanted that deal.
To become untouchable for murder.
Correct.
The very essence of the state's case had to be proven through Kimberly Miller. And obviously, we attacked her at every moment.
For the defense to attack the credibility of Kim Miller as the prosecution's key witness, frankly, isn't that hard.
As far as your relationship with Mr. Perez goes, that he made drug deals from your home while you were residing there.
Yes.
There was frequent traffic coming and going.
Yes.
He showed you the money.
Yes.
She has admitted to selling drugs, cocaine, having a cocaine habit.
This deposition was given January 22, 2001, and at that point, you're still maintaining under oath that you didn't know he had done this when you went to visit him in the jail. Correct?
Correct.
And certainly that was not true, was it?
No.
You knew full well that he had killed Ron Stovall.
You're right.
She has given numerous contradictory statements, including during a sworn deposition.
What you were trying to do was trying to stay out of being incarcerated for a murder trial, isn't that right?
Yes.
Whenever Kim Miller is moving her lips, you know that something she's going to say is not going to be accurate. She indicated no one else was involved in this. And then all of a sudden, when it comes time that her life is on the line in an indictment for murder in the first degree, she comes up with, Ann Trexler paid me money to give Antonio Perez.
But the defense didn't want to just discredit Kim Miller's testimony. They wanted to give the jury an alternate reality to consider.
We were going to prove that Kim Miller not only had something to do with the killing of Ron Stovall, she was the motivation for Ron Stovall's death. She was present at the time of his death, and it was her concept that he be killed.
The defense was about to drop a bombshell accusation, one that prosecutor Joe Grammer knew was coming.
At the time, there was a television show. In that show, the defense attorneys often did what they call Plan B somebody, which is try to point at someone other than their client. And I said to myself, that's what they're trying to do here is Plan B somebody.
The defense's Plan B was Kim Miller, and in their version of events, Miller knew Ron Stovall intimately prior to his murder.
Kim Miller and Ron Stovall, at some point in the past, prior to Antonio Perez's relationship with her, they were lovers. She cut his hair. She was having a sexual relationship with him.
It was her concept that he be killed based on the fact that they were former lovers, that he had abused her mentally and physically.
To prove their theory, the defense called on Tony Perez, the hitman who had killed Ron Stovall.
I think the jury was probably as surprised by that as any of us. When Tony takes the witness stand, we are all dying to hear what he's got to say.
Did she indicate to you that he had hurt her emotionally?
There was a lot of bad feelings on her behalf between certain men. Ron Stovall was one of them. He hurt her where it wasn't just her feelings, but the way she felt about the kids and about how she lived and her lifestyle.
Did he call her a derogatory name?
White trailer trash is the one that really made her angry.
When Ron came into the salon with his daughter Kirsten, Miller claimed the girl was being abused.
Kim had some words with me about how angry and and mean that Ron was to her, and how she knew that what he was doing to that little girl.
She told you that Ron Stovall had physically abused this child?
Yes, sir.
That enraged Antonio Perez. And from there, they hatched this plan to kill him. The plan was Ken Miller's plan to abduct him, take him to a lonely, deserted road, shoot him in the back of the head, and leave him to die.
You went from not knowing him to hating him at that point?
Oh, yeah, most definitely hatred.
Was that a calm, cool, collected hate, or did that bring the fire and passion in you?
I killed the man because I hated him that much.
Do you recognize these two firearms, sir?
Yes, sir.
How do you recognize?
They were a couple of the guns that I had on that night, that morning.
You recognize this, which has been admitted into evidence as number 42?
Yes, sir.
How do you recognize it?
It's a gun that I had gotten from Kim.
Did she take you to Ron Stovall's house?
Yes, sir.
Did she take you there with the understanding that you were going there to kill him based on the things that she had told you about her personal relationship with him and the child's beating?
Yes.
Did Ann Trexler have anything to do with the death of Ron Stovall in October of 1998?
No, sir.
Did she pay you a dime, offer you a dime, or any other consideration for the acts that you did in those early morning hours?
No, sir.
But she would be the easiest one for Kim to set up.
Yes, to pass the blame off, yes, sir.
By Antonio Perez's own statement, she said, "Keep me out of this and we can put this off on Ann Trexler."
I don't expect no one to do no time that didn't have nothing to do with this.
Did Ann Trexler have anything to do with this homicide?
She had nothing to do with it.
What better testimony is there than from the actual killer, who now says, as one of the lines that I remember Antonio Perez said, Ms. Trexler didn't have nothing to do with it.
You know, the jurors have quite a challenge here, evaluating the truthfulness of people like Kim Miller and Tony Perez. But that's kind of the nature of these kind of cases.
Coming up, the jury hears from the accused murderer herself.
They needed Ann Trexler to look that jury in the eye and say she didn't do it.
The hitman, Tony Perez, had testified that it was Ann's hairdresser, Kim Miller, not Ann, who had orchestrated Ron Stovall's murder. Now, the church-going grandmother took the stand in a high-stakes bid to escape execution.
Defendant never has to testify, but in this case, we felt certain that the jury wanted to hear from her mouth, look into her eyes, and see into her soul that she could not do this.
You state your name, please.
Priscilla Ann Trexler.
When Ann Trexler got up on the witness stand, you could really hear a pin drop. The jury is paying rapt attention.
The defense immediately addressed the $10,000 Ann and her husband Jack withdrew before Ron's murder.
Did you and your husband make an agreement with Tina to assist her in coming up with funds to hire an experienced custody litigator?
Right.
Did you have an idea what type of money she was going to need to hire someone with that stature?
We found out it would be at least $10,000, at least.
What the defense is trying to show the jury is that the money Ann Trexler pulled out of her credit card account was in fact going to her daughter Tina to pay for a custody attorney.
How did you become to know Kim Miller?
She was my hairdresser.
Was she your friend or your hairstylist?
No, she was my hairstylist, but you get... every hairstylist I've ever had, you just sit there and talk about life.
And did you talk to her about the custody issues that were going on with Tina
Yes, I did.
and Ron Stovall?
Yes.
Did you let her know that there were hard feelings between the two sides?
Yes, I did.
So she knew about the custody battle. She knew about Ann's worries about losing her granddaughter to Ron Stovall.
Did you let her know that Tina was trying to hire a competent, quality lawyer for her defense?
Yes, I did.
And did you tell her that you were trying to raise a large sum of money to do that?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell her approximately how much?
I believe I did.
How much did you tell her?
I told her we needed at least $10,000.
According to the defense, Kim Miller used this information to frame Ann Trexler.
She had access to all this information so she could spin this web of lies to catch Ann in and pin the murder of Ron on her while it was really Kim's idea.
She also corroborated a key detail of Perez's testimony.
Did she ever indicate whether or not she knew a person by the name of Ron Stovall?
Yes, she did. She says, oh, I know him, and I know his mother and sister. I used to do their hair.
Did she indicate if they ever had any type of relationship with one another?
Yes, she did.
What did she say?
She said they used to mess around together, her and Ron.
Ann Trexler's defense attorney, of course, wanted to paint her as a loving grandmother, but not one that would kill for her granddaughter.
My question to you is this. Did you have anything whatsoever to do with Ron Stovall's death?
No, I did not.
Did you want Ron Stovall dead?
No, I did not.
Their testimony was truthful, and we felt that it was very easily discernible that she was being truthful in her testimony.
Prosecutor Joe Grammer had a different take on Trexler's testimony.
When she was questioned by her lawyer, did you have anything to do with the murder of Ron Stovall? And she said, no, I did not. Now, I'm not making fun of her. I'm just quoting the way that she said that. She was weepy when she testified, and she said, I loved him. He was my son-in-law, and I don't think it came across very well. And when I got a chance to cross-examine Ann Trexler, it was very obvious to the jury that she could easily answer the questions that were asked by her attorney, but she couldn't answer even the most basic questions without hesitation that I asked her.
Do you recall having several phone contacts with Kim Miller in the days leading up to the death of Ron Stovall?
Don't recall. No, I don't recall.
There's this volume of unexplained phone calls that go on for 2, 3, 4 minutes sometimes.
And do you recall on September the 18th, that same day, making a call from your house to Kim Miller's home?
No, I don't remember doing that either.
The specific timing of this call didn't matter so much. It was more the volume of the evidence.
Do you recall having a telephone call from Kim Miller's cell phone to your home at 12 minutes after midnight on September the 26th, 1998?
No, sir.
Call that lasted 94 seconds.
No, sir, I do not.
Unexplained phone calls between Kim Miller and Ann Trexler that Ann hasn't been able to explain right around the time and before the time of the killing. That's strong circumstantial evidence that they were talking about the murder.
And the records that have been admitted that that phone call exists, would you deny that the phone call was made?
No, not if you have it on record. There's no way I could.
I was able to argue she sure was straightforward when she talked to her lawyer, but she sure wasn't straightforward when she talked to me.
Both the prosecution and defense had rested their case in the murder trial of Ann Trexler, and now her fate, which included a possible death sentence, was in the hands of the jury.
Ann is dedicated to her religion and is a very strong woman. She had it set in her heart, no matter what happened, it was the Lord's work and she would accept it.
In a case like this, we worked on it. We worked on it for years to get to this point and tried it hard for now 6 days, and you just don't know.
When we filed into that courtroom to hear the verdict, the Trexlers were there, the Stovalls were there on opposite ends of the courtroom. Everyone was incredibly emotional. Ron's parents were holding each other like they had been for a lot of the trial. Ann Trexler obviously was clutching tissues.
In the Circuit Court, 14th Judicial Circuit of the State of Florida in Fort Bay County, State of Florida versus Ann Trexler, defendant. Verdict: we, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant, Ann Trexler, in this case. The defendant is guilty of principal to murder in the first degree.
A guilty verdict? Well, I thought it was the right thing, and that's what should happen. That's my reaction to it. It was what I was expecting.
The family members, they were very emotional. They were happy. They were also very sad. They cried. when they hugged my neck. And none of them said an ill word about Ann Trexler other than, I'm glad that she was convicted for what she did.
Are you satisfied with the system and the way it's worked?
Yes, ma'am, it works. And, it's a sad day for them. It's a sad day for us.
I feel like justice was done. We have prayed for this, that God would intervene and His will be done in this.
Hearing the guilty verdict obviously was incredibly difficult for Ann Trexler. She was holding hands with Russ Ramey, her attorney.
So when the jury's verdict came in and they said guilty to the crime of principal murder in the first degree, I had to have a second thought to make sure that that's what I heard. Because it did shock me that the jury would come back, particularly so quickly, with a verdict of guilty. We have someone who has been sentenced for the rest of their natural life in the state prison system who, prior to this, had never been accused of doing anything wrong in their life. To me, that's inconceivable in this case, and not supported by the facts I heard in the courtroom. We will be appealing the verdict of guilt because we do not believe it's based on the evidence. Believe in the system, but we believe the system let us down in this case.
She'd been found guilty, but the jury had yet to determine if Ann Trexler should die for her crime. That was the state's recommendation, but neither side seemed to think that it was very likely.
If you look at Ann Trexler, she has a daughter, she has a granddaughter, right? She's a church-going lady. Is that who the jury is going to put to death?
The jury took only slightly more time deciding her sentence than they did her guilt.
It is the sense of the law that she be committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections and be imprisoned for a term of life without possibility of parole.
I think that's a just sentence, especially since the actual killer had been sentenced to life in the same courtroom sometime prior to that.
I think God answered prayer, and His will and justice is done, and that's all I wanted.
It's been more than 20 years since Ron Stovall was gunned down here inside his own home, killed because a grandmother thought murder was the best way to continue to see her granddaughter, and because her hairdresser said she knew a guy who could help make it happen.
This is one of those cases where you say truth is stranger than fiction and you can't make this stuff up. You know, that's what it is. You can't make this stuff up.
Ann Trexler remains incarcerated at the Lowell Correctional Institution Annex in Ocala, Florida. After pleading guilty to the murder of Ron Stovall, Tony Perez was sent to prison where he died in 2012. Kim Miller is on probation for drug-related charges, but remains free to this day. There you have it. For more Court TV original productions, check out the show notes for links to stream our catalog of true crime series for free. And you can see me on my show, Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan, every weeknight at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.